Hello and welcome. What do stories say? I'm Dr. Pauline Baird, your cultural bearer from the village of Buxton, Guyana. And as you know, I tell the stories of my village, our family traditions, our whispered stories, our practice, lost, long, sometimes forgotten traditions. What do stories say? Well, last time, I told you stories about me and how my father gave me the pair of man shoes. Perhaps what you didn't know is that my father was a single parent raising five kids. It was very challenging. As an adult, I've grown to appreciate that more. And as I walk the world, I wonder, how do people do thrift? And so, for one of my classes called Global Life and Culture, I interviewed people from around the world talking about thrift, gathering stories about thrift. So, what I bring to you today is with the permission of Pastor Frank Tan and Mrs. Betty Tan. They come from villages similar to ours, and they tell stories about thrift. They hail from Taiwan and the Philippines. I really appreciate this story, so thank you very much. Go ahead.
I am Frank Han. I am a Chinese Filipino in a sense. I was born and grew up in Manila, Philippines, but my nationality has always been Chinese, even though I grew up in the Philippines. So I basically grew up as an immigrant or as a resident alien in the Philippines. The area that I grew up in is in the Chinatown area of Manila. So we grew up speaking Amoy dialect in our homes, went to school, and the school that we went to was a Chinese school, and it had English and Tagalog or Filipino instruction in the morning, and then Chinese instruction in the afternoon.
Perfect. How are you a thrifty person and why?
There's a sense that I am a thrifty person, but if I were going to pick a number from 1 to 10
Yeah.
in terms of whether I'm thrifty, 10 being thrifty and 1 being wasteful, I would probably say that I am at the 6 or a 6.5 because I grew up in a family of 9 children, and there were certain things that you did that you knew you had to be thrifty and not be wasteful because you didn't have enough food to go around.
Mhm.
So you didn't waste the food. You always finished the food. But then I had brothers and sisters who were way more thrifty than I am. They would
Oh,
save every penny. Whereas I also had brothers and sisters who were pretty much, I guess, they spent whatever they had. And if they needed more, they would borrow. Uh, they would borrow from their siblings or borrow from the parents and and spend more. Whereas I was more in the middle of where if I had something I would spend, but I didn't spend it all.
okay.
But I didn't put much into savings either. So just middle of the road.
Okay. All right. um, you said you grew up in Chinatown in the Philippines. How were the people thrifty? What did you see around there? Like, share a little story of thrift that you saw.
Okay. Well, in terms of people in Chinatown, one of the things that we are very thrifty in is not just, I guess, among the Chinese immigrants in the Philippines, but also among the Filipinos, is because when we were growing up, we had several years where typhoon season would come,
Mhm.
and a lot of crops in the provinces that were agricultural provinces and were producing a lot of the crops that we would eat would be destroyed by the typhoons. And so we would always be reminded, either from media and television or in other ways from our teachers and parents, not to be wasteful of our food. So one of the things that I have from those years is that I will eat every thing on my plate and I don't leave anything on it. And it's still a habit that I do right now. So leftovers, I don't want to throw them out. I'll eat them instead of throwing them.
Yeah. So
That's the
I can understand that. My culture is similar. But anyway, so I think you just gave me your childhood experience there with thrift. I don't know if you had anything else to share in terms of childhood and thrift.
well, growing up in a family with 9 kids, I definitely had to wear a lot of hand-me-downs, and it was very much it was very much accepted. I did not see it as a problem. Never even thought about asking for new clothes. I was happy with what my brothers handed down to me.
Mhm,
And the good thing was that my mom was a dressmaker,
mhm.
so anything that didn't quite fit, she could actually fix so that it would fit us.
Right. Nice.
So uh, a lot of things in terms of the culture are also based on what my parents went through
Mhm,
as they were growing up. And so I believe that for my dad, one of the things that happened was that his dad died pretty early.
mhm,
I think my grandfather died uh, just a few years, couple of years after my dad first got married,
mhm.
and so there was a period of time where we were, I guess, I wasn't born yet, but the family was not doing very well. There
Mhm.
were a lot of debts, so my dad had to step up as the oldest son in the family. He had to go talk with the creditors to give us some time. He had to figure out ways to take care of the debts. I He also had to drop out of college in order to find work
Right.
for that.
Hmm.
So a
Wow.
lot of things then in the family would be because we remember the times that were tough
Right.
and things were good. Well, one of the things that I've always learned from my childhood is that you don't spend what you don't have,
Mhm.
uh, because if you do that, you're never ever going to pay things back. So by the time I grew up and had I guess, credit card for the first time, and it never occurred to me to spend uh, and pay something back with interest. The thought has always been that if I buy something, I would pay off the balance. So, and that was something that I learned from my childhood because we actually, with 9 kids in the house, we had a little bit of allowance. My grandma was kind of like the bank. Like I said, I had some siblings that saved money. They would save the money and ask grandma to hold on to it. And then I had siblings that would spend money and then they would borrow money. They would go to the bank of grandma to borrow money. And then when it came time for them to pay their debts, they couldn't pay it off. And so they had to appeal to the bank of dad, to ask him to take care of their balances. And I thought, well, that's not right.
Mhm.
So there were a lot of things that went on in the family that's like, oh yeah, so this is, if you have the money, you spend it, but if you don't have the money, don't try to spend it. So
Right.
that's one of the things that applied to me as I grew up as an adult, to think about,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want to take on the credit card and take on debt that am not able to pay off.
Right. I hear that. So, with that, what advice would you give to a young person about thrift, and what might global innovators need to know about thrift?
Well, uh, I'm not sure about the global innovators part as
Hmm.
much, but for young people, with my own kids, we basically reminded them or showed them from a very early age
Hmm.
uh, what uh, our spending habits were like. so that they could see what the finances of the family were. They could understand it. We would talk to them. Yeah, our children in grew up knowing what our financial situation was
Mhm.
when we had enough, when God provided what we needed, and we had enough. She knew that when times were tough, when I was laid off and looking for a job, she was aware of that. So we never tried to keep our finances a secret from our kids. There were there was a difference in terms of how much we would tell them. The older they were, the more they knew. The
Mhm.
younger, we didn't give them as much details, but we still let them know what was going on. And
Right.
I think it helped them understood what finances were like, so that now that all of them are adults, young adults, they have a better understanding of finances, and the fact that they need to be able to earn and then spend what they have. In terms of global innovators, I guess an understanding of how finances really work instead of just thinking that things will be provided to you by your parents, or uh, that you will always have it because tough times will come. So if you don't set aside things for tough times, then you will, when the tough times do come, you're not going to be able to survive. So that's probably going to be helpful for them to remember that it's there's a lot of opportunities for you to try new things out, but you always want to have a fallback in your
Right.
plans.
Oh, the thing about stories is that stories help to bring us together. Stories shape our lives, and we can go out and shape the world. So let us enjoy these stories and give a nice, warm Bostonian and Guyanese welcome. And from wherever you've come from, give them a warm welcome for telling us their stories. My students have heard these stories and they had a lot to say, some interesting responses. But I wouldn't share that here. But I want you to share your stories in return. Because as we share our stories, as I say, we impact our world. And we come to learn that our experiences are not necessarily very unique, but they are sometimes shaped by circumstances in different places and that are sometimes eye opening. Whatever stories do, I know for sure that stories can help us to think more about ourselves and to give more of ourselves to the world and to benefit our own lives. So thank you very much and walk good.